morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Marcus Thompson walked toward the main administrative building. His combat uniform bore the stains and wear of countless field operations, mud caked into the fabric, small tears from barbed wire, and the distinctive marks of someone who spent more time in actual combat zones than behind a desk. Marcus had just returned from a grueling 3-week mission in hostile territory. His unit had been tasked with securing a remote outpost that had been under siege for months. They had succeeded, but not without cost. The exhaustion showed in his weathered face and the slight limp in his left leg from shrapnel that had grazed him during the final assault. As he approached the building's entrance, he noticed a group of freshly pressed officers standing near the steps. Their uniforms were immaculate, creases sharp enough to cut paper, boots polished to a mirror shine. They were clearly desk officers, the kind who managed logistics and paperwork while others did the fighting. Captain Bradley Henderson, a man in his early 30s with soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen, spotted Marcus first. He nudged his companions and whispered something that made them all turn to stare. Their expressions shifted from mild curiosity to barely concealed disgust. Marcus needed to file his after-action report and collect the personal effects of 2 soldiers from his unit who hadn't made it home. It was a duty he took seriously, knowing that families were waiting for closure. He climbed the steps steadily, his muddy boots leaving faint prints on the polished marble. The group of officers didn't move aside as he approached. Instead, they formed a tighter cluster, forcing Marcus to navigate around them. As he passed, Captain Henderson spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look at this mess," Henderson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Some people have no respect for the uniform or this institution, walking around looking like he just crawled out of a foxhole." Lieutenant Collins, a young man who had graduated from the military academy just 6 months ago, joined in. "Absolutely disgraceful. In my day at the academy, we learned that appearance reflects discipline. This is exactly what's wrong with the military today, no standards." Marcus paused for a moment, his jaw tightening. He had heard this kind of talk before from officers who had never seen real combat, never had to choose between a clean uniform and staying alive. But he had a job to do, and engaging with these men would only delay him from his important duties. He continued toward the entrance, but the comments followed him like a bad smell. "Probably some low-ranking grunt who thinks the rules don't apply to him," Henderson continued. "Command really needs to crack down on this kind of behavior. It's embarrassing to the entire service." The other officers murmured their agreement, their voices a chorus of disapproval and superiority. They had no idea who Marcus was or what he had just accomplished. To them, he was simply a soldier who didn't meet their standards of military appearance, someone beneath their notice except as an object of ridicule. Marcus reached for the heavy glass door, his hand leaving a slight smudge on the brass handle. Behind him, he could still hear their whispered conversations, picking apart every aspect of his appearance from his unkempt hair to his worn boots. Their words stung not because they were true, but because they represented everything wrong with a system that valued appearance over substance. As he stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the polished floor. He saw what they saw, a tired, dirty soldier who looked like he had been through hell. What they couldn't see was the courage it had taken to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments, the nights spent awake to keep his men safe, or the weight of responsibility he carried for every soldier under his command. The lobby was filled with personnel going about their daily business, most of them support staff who rarely left the safety of the base. They glanced at Marcus with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment, their clean offices and predictable schedules a world away from the chaos and uncertainty of combat operations. Marcus approached the reception desk, where a young corporal sat behind bulletproof glass. The corporal's uniform was spotless, his hair perfectly groomed, his desk organized with military precision. When he looked up and saw Marcus, his expression immediately shifted to one of professional distance mixed with subtle disapproval. "I need to file an after-action report and arrange for personal effects transfer," Marcus said quietly, his voice hoarse from days of shouting orders over gunfire and explosions. The corporal's eyes traveled over Marcus's appearance, taking in every stain and tear. "You'll need to wait in the designated area," he said curtly, pointing to a row of plastic chairs along the wall. "Someone will call you when they're ready to process your paperwork." Marcus took his place in the waiting area, settling into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to remind visitors of their low priority. The administrative building buzzed with activity as clerks and officers moved between offices, carrying files and clipboards with self-important efficiency. The contrast between this sterile environment and the battlefield he had left behind just hours ago couldn't have been starker. From his seat, Marcus could see through the large windows to where Captain Henderson and his group still lingered outside. They had been joined by more officers, and their conversation had grown more animated. Occasionally, one of them would gesture toward the building, and Marcus realized he was still the subject of their discussion. The minutes ticked by slowly. Marcus watched as other personnel came and went, most of them processed quickly and efficiently. But whenever the corporal at the reception desk glanced in his direction, there seemed to be another delay, another form to find, another procedure to follow. It was becoming clear that his appearance was affecting the level of service he received. A young private approached the reception desk, his uniform equally dirty and worn from field exercises. Marcus watched with interest as the same corporal who had dismissed him suddenly became much more accommodating, processing the private's paperwork with speed and efficiency. The difference in treatment was obvious, and Marcus began to understand that his reception had less to do with procedure and more to do with prejudice. Behind him, he heard the familiar sound of dress shoes clicking against the marble floor. Two majors walked past, their conversation drifting back to his ears. "Standards are really slipping these days," one of them said. "Look at that soldier over there. Absolutely unprofessional. Someone should report him to his commanding officer." The other major glanced at Marcus and shook his head in disgust. Probably one of those soldiers who thinks combat experience excuses everything. They need to learn that discipline starts with appearance. Marcus clenched his fists but remained seated. He thought about the two soldiers whose personal effects he was here to collect. Sergeant Mills had saved 3 wounded men before a sniper's bullet found its mark. Private Chen had thrown himself on a grenade to protect his squad, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. Both men had died with dirty uniforms, their appearance far from regulation standards, but their courage and sacrifice immeasurable. The hypocrisy of the situation wasn't lost on him. These clean, pressed officers who spoke so confidently about standards and discipline had never faced the choice between following dress codes and staying alive. They had never had to crawl through mud under enemy fire or sleep in foxholes filled with rainwater. Their understanding of military service was limited to what they could see and measure in the safety of an administrative building. A group of visiting civilians, likely defense contractors or government officials, entered the lobby. They were led by a lieutenant colonel, whose uniform was so perfect it looked like it had been sewn onto his body. As they passed Marcus, the lieutenant colonel made a point of steering the group away from him, as if his appearance might somehow contaminate the visitor's impression of the military. "As you can see," the lieutenant colonel said in a voice loud enough to be clearly heard, "we maintain the highest standards of military bearing and professional appearance throughout our organization. Every soldier is expected to represent the service with pride and dignity." The irony was devastating. Here was an officer using Marcus as a negative example to impress civilians, completely unaware that the dirty, tired soldier he was disparaging had just completed one of the most dangerous and successful missions in recent memory. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to push away the frustration building inside him. He thought about his men, both the living and the dead, and the mission they had accomplished together. They had held an impossible position against overwhelming odds, buying time for civilian evacuations and preventing a strategic disaster. The success of their mission had saved hundreds of lives and secured a crucial supply route. But none of that mattered in this pristine administrative building where appearance was everything and substance was invisible. Here, a clean uniform carried more weight than courage, and a polished boot was more valuable than a brave heart. The corporal at the reception desk finally called his name, but when Marcus approached, he was told that the officer who handled his type of paperwork was at lunch and wouldn't be back for another hour. It was obvious stalling, a deliberate attempt to make him wait even longer, perhaps hoping he would give up and leave. Marcus returned to his seat, aware that every person in the lobby was watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. Some whispered to their colleagues, others simply stared with open disapproval. He had become a spectacle, a cautionary tale about what happened when soldiers forgot their place and proper appearance. Outside, Captain Henderson's group had grown larger, now including several junior officers who had been drawn by the ongoing commentary about standards and discipline. Their discussion had evolved into a broader critique of modern military culture, with Marcus serving as their primary example of everything that was wrong with today's armed forces. The lunch hour came and went, and Marcus remained in his plastic chair, watching the steady stream of personnel flow through the lobby. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since the previous evening, but he refused to leave his post. The families of his fallen soldiers deserved better than bureaucratic delays caused by prejudice and small-mindedness. A new group of officers entered the building, fresh from what appeared to be a promotion ceremony. Their dress uniforms gleamed with polished brass and colorful ribbons, their bearing confident and proud. Among them was Major Patricia Williams, a decorated officer known for her sharp intellect and fair treatment of subordinates. Unlike the others, she had served multiple combat tours before being assigned to administrative duties. Major Williams noticed Marcus immediately, but her reaction was different from the others. Instead of disgust or disapproval, she saw something familiar in his appearance. She recognized the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much combat, the particular way dust and dirt accumulated on gear during extended field operations, and the careful way he moved that suggested recent injury. As she passed through the lobby, Major Williams overheard Captain Henderson's group, which had now moved their discussion inside. They were regaling a new audience with their observations about declining military standards, using Marcus as their primary exhibit. "It's soldiers like that one who make us all look bad," Henderson was saying, pointing discreetly in Marcus's direction. "No pride, no discipline, no respect for the uniform. Probably some troublemaker who barely made it through basic training." Lieutenant Collins nodded eagerly. "Exactly right, sir. In my opinion, soldiers who can't maintain basic appearance standards shouldn't be allowed in administrative buildings. They should be restricted to the motor pool or kitchen duty until they learn proper military bearing." Major Williams felt her jaw tighten as she listened to their ignorant commentary. She had seen too many good soldiers judged by their appearance rather than their actions. Too many heroes dismissed by people who had never faced enemy fire. The criticism being leveled at Marcus was not just unfair, it was dangerous to military culture and morale. She approached the group with measured steps, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Gentlemen," she said in a voice that carried the authority of her rank and experience, "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about military standards." Captain Henderson straightened, recognizing her superior rank. "Yes, ma'am. We were just discussing the importance of maintaining proper appearance and discipline." "I see," Major Williams replied, her eyes moving from Henderson to Marcus and back again. "And your assessment is based on what criteria exactly?" Henderson seemed confused by the question. "Well, ma'am, it's obvious. Just look at him. His uniform is filthy, his boots are muddy, his appearance is completely unprofessional. It reflects poorly on all of us." Major Williams nodded slowly. "Tell me, Captain, when was your last field deployment?" The question caught Henderson off guard. Well, ma'am, my current assignment involves strategic planning and resource allocation. Very important work that requires my full attention here at headquarters." "So that would be never," Major Williams stated flatly. "And you, Lieutenant Collins? Any combat experience?" Collins flushed red. "No, ma'am, but I don't see how that's relevant to maintaining proper military appearance standards." Major Williams turned to address the broader group. "Gentlemen, let me share something with you about military standards. Real standards aren't measured by how clean your uniform is or how perfectly your boots are polished. Real standards are measured by courage under fire, loyalty to your brothers in arms, and willingness to sacrifice for something greater than yourself." The group shifted uncomfortably, sensing that their comfortable assumptions were about to be challenged. Major Williams continued, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. "That soldier you've been mocking has just returned from Operation Ironhold, one of the most dangerous missions our forces have undertaken in years. While you've been sitting in air-conditioned offices, he and his men have been holding an impossible position against overwhelming odds." Captain Henderson's face began to pale as the implications of Major Williams' words sank in. "Ma'am, we had no way of knowing." "Of course you didn't," she interrupted, because you made assumptions based on appearance rather than taking the time to learn the facts. That soldier's dirty uniform isn't a sign of poor discipline. It's a badge of honor earned through service to his country. Lieutenant Collins stammered an attempt at justification. But surely appearance standards still matter, ma'am. Military bearing is important for... Military bearing, Major Williams said, her voice rising slightly, is about how you conduct yourself under pressure, not how you look in a mirror. That soldier has more military bearing in his muddy bootlaces than some officers have in their entire careers. The crowd that had gathered around the spectacle began to murmur among themselves. Some nodded in agreement with Major Williams, while others seemed uncomfortable with having their prejudices exposed so publicly. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted dramatically, and Marcus could feel the change even from his seat across the room. Major Williams wasn't finished. I want all of you to take a good look at that soldier and remember this moment. Remember that you judged a hero based on the dirt on his uniform, rather than the content of his character. Remember that while you were criticizing his appearance, he was carrying the weight of lost comrades and the responsibility of mission success. The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Henderson and his companions found themselves unable to meet Major Williams's stern gaze. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The other officers in the lobby watched the scene unfold with growing awareness of their own complicity in the unfair treatment Marcus had received. The tension in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife when the main entrance doors opened, with a sharp whoosh of compressed air. The sound of heavy military boots echoed against the marble floor as a distinguished figure entered the building. Brigadier General Robert Hayes, a man whose reputation preceded him wherever he went, stepped into the administrative center with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. General Hayes was a living legend in military circles. His chest bore the ribbons of 3 bronze stars, 2 silver stars, and the Distinguished Service Cross. His weathered face told the story of 30 years of military service, from his days as a young lieutenant in desert campaigns to his current position overseeing multiple combat divisions. Unlike many general officers, Hayes had never forgotten what it meant to be a soldier in the field. The entire lobby seemed to freeze as his presence was recognized. Officers straightened to attention, enlisted personnel snapped to rigid posture, and even the civilian contractors stopped their conversations mid-sentence. General Hayes commanded respect not just through his rank, but through his reputation as a leader who genuinely cared about his soldiers and understood the realities of military life. His keen eyes swept the room, taking in the scene before him. He noticed the cluster of officers around Major Williams, the uncomfortable expressions on their faces, and most importantly, the lone soldier sitting in the waiting area, wearing a combat uniform that told its own story of recent hardship. General Hayes had seen that look before, the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier who had recently returned from hell and was still processing the experience. He recognized the specific pattern of wear on the uniform, the particular way dust and grime accumulated during extended combat operations in hostile terrain. Most tellingly, he noticed the small unit patch on the soldier's shoulder, a patch that immediately commanded his attention. As he approached the group, the conversations died away entirely. Major Williams came to attention, as did the other officers, though some seemed more nervous than others about the general's unexpected presence. "As you were," General Hayes said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command even at conversational volume. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus, studying the unit insignia and combat patches with growing recognition. Captain Henderson, still rattled from Major Williams' rebuke but desperate to regain some standing, saw an opportunity to redirect the conversation. "General Hayes, sir, we were just discussing the importance of maintaining proper military appearance standards. Some of us feel that discipline has become too relaxed, particularly regarding uniform presentation." General Hayes turned his attention to Henderson with a look that could have frozen molten steel. "Were you now, Captain? And what exactly prompted this discussion?" Henderson gestured toward Marcus with what he hoped was subtle discretion. "Well, sir, we've noticed that some soldiers seem to think that combat experience excuses them from basic military standards. We feel it's important to maintain discipline regardless of circumstances." The general's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He walked slowly toward Marcus, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent lobby. Every person present held their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. General Hayes stopped directly in front of Marcus, who immediately began to rise from his chair. "Stay seated, soldier," the general said gently. "You've earned the right to rest." He then did something that shocked everyone present. The general slowly and deliberately came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute to the seated soldier. Marcus, despite his exhaustion and surprise, immediately returned the salute with precision that spoke to years of military training. "Sergeant Marcus Thompson," General Hayes said in a voice that carried to every corner of the lobby, "it is my honor to finally meet you in person." The use of Marcus's name sent ripples of confusion through the crowd. How did the general know this dirty, tired soldier? Why was he showing such respect to someone that others had been mocking and dismissing? General Hayes continued, his voice growing stronger and more ceremonial. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, recipient of the Silver Star Bronze Star with V device and Purple Heart. Sergeant Thompson has just returned from Operation Ironhold, where he and his unit held Strategic Outpost Delta against overwhelming enemy forces for 18 days. The lobby fell into complete silence as the weight of the general's words sank in. Captain Henderson felt his face drain of color as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Lieutenant Collins looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Even Major Williams, who had defended Marcus, seemed surprised by the extent of his achievements. General Hayes wasn't finished. He turned to address the crowd more broadly, his voice carrying the tone of a commander delivering a crucial lesson to his troops. "While many of you have been sitting safely behind desks, critiquing the appearance of your fellow soldiers, Sergeant Thompson and his men were fighting for their lives and the lives of others." He gestured to Marcus's uniform, the same dirty, worn clothing that had drawn so much criticism. "Every stain on this uniform, every tear in this fabric represents courage under fire. This soldier held an impossible position with minimal supplies and no hope of immediate reinforcement. He saved the lives of 63 wounded soldiers during the evacuation, personally carrying 7 men to safety under enemy fire." The general's words painted a vivid picture of heroism that stood in stark contrast to the earlier judgments about military appearance. The officers who had been so quick to criticize now found themselves face to face with their own ignorance and prejudice. General Hayes reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, handling it with the reverence reserved for sacred texts. The paper bore the official seal of the Department of Defense, and as he unfolded it, the formal language of military commendation became visible to those standing nearby. "Sergeant Thompson," the general said, his voice carrying both authority and emotion, "I had originally planned to present this to you in a formal ceremony next week, but given the circumstances, I believe now is the appropriate time." He cleared his throat and began to read from the document, his words echoing through the marble lobby like a sermon in a cathedral. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States, while serving with the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment during Operation Ironhold." As the general continued reading the citation, the details of Marcus's heroism became clear to everyone present. The document described how he had voluntarily extended his unit's mission when intelligence revealed that civilian contractors were trapped behind enemy lines. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, Marcus had led his exhausted men deeper into hostile territory to execute a rescue operation that military planners had deemed impossible. The citation detailed 18 days of continuous combat, during which Marcus's unit had been surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from supplies. He had personally destroyed 3 enemy positions, saved multiple wounded soldiers, and coordinated the successful evacuation of 47 civilian contractors who would have otherwise faced certain death. Captain Henderson stood frozen, as each word of the citation drove home the extent of his misjudgment. The soldier he had dismissed as undisciplined had led one of the most successful rescue operations in recent military history. The uniform he had mocked as unprofessional was actually the evidence of extraordinary service and sacrifice, Lieutenant. Collins felt physically ill as he listened to the general describe how Marcus had carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire, using his own body as a shield to protect them from sniper rounds. The young officer realized that his comfortable theories about military standards and discipline meant nothing when compared to actual combat. experience, and genuine heroism. The lobby had filled with additional personnel, drawn by the unusual ceremony taking place. Word spread quickly through the building that a general was publicly recognizing a combat hero, and soon every available person had gathered to witness the event. The contrast between Marcus's humble appearance and his extraordinary achievements created a powerful lesson about the dangers of superficial judgment. General Hayes finished reading the citation and looked directly at the group of officers who had been criticizing Marcus. "This soldier," he said with unmistakable emphasis, "volunteered for the most dangerous mission our forces have undertaken in years. While others stayed safely behind, he led his men into harm's way to save lives." He turned back to Marcus, who had remained seated throughout the reading as instructed. "Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of a grateful nation and the families of the 47 people you saved, I present you with the Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor." The general pinned the medal to Marcus's dirty uniform, the shining brass and colorful ribbon creating a striking contrast against the mud-stained fabric. The symbolism was powerful and intentional. True honor wasn't about appearance but about actions taken in service of others. Spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd that had gathered. The sound echoed off the marble walls and high ceiling, creating a thunderous tribute to genuine heroism. Even the civilian contractors joined in, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and meaningful. Major Williams stepped forward and added her voice to the recognition. "General Hayes, if I may, I'd like to add that Sergeant Thompson's conduct today has been exemplary despite facing unfair treatment and prejudice. He maintained his composure and dignity even when others questioned his character based solely on his appearance." The general nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of military bearing we should expect from our finest soldiers. True discipline isn't about having a perfect uniform. It's about doing your duty regardless of the circumstances or obstacles you face." Captain Henderson felt compelled to speak, though his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sir, we had no idea. We made assumptions based on appearance and we were completely wrong." General Hayes fixed Henderson with a stern look. "Captain, assumptions are dangerous in military service. They can cost lives, destroy careers, and undermine the very foundations of trust that hold our forces together. Today you learned that lesson without anyone dying because of your ignorance. Consider yourself fortunate." The general's words carried the weight of hard experience and ultimate authority. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing more than just a medal presentation. They were receiving a masterclass in leadership, judgment, and the true meaning of military values. Lieutenant Collins found the courage to add his own apology. "Sir, we were completely wrong about Sergeant Thompson. We let our preconceptions cloud our judgment and we treated a hero with disrespect. There's no excuse for our behavior." Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Thank you, General Hayes, for this honor. But I was just doing my job, sir. My men did the real fighting and 2 of them didn't make it home. They're the ones who deserve recognition." The humility in his response only served to highlight the contrast between genuine heroism and empty posturing. Here was a man who had accomplished extraordinary things while remaining focused on his duty and his fallen comrades rather than personal recognition or glory. General Hayes placed a fatherly hand on Marcus's shoulder, his expression softening with genuine respect and affection. "Sergeant Thompson, the mark of a true leader is that he always credits his men and takes responsibility for any failures. Your humility in this moment only confirms what I already knew about your character." He turned to address the entire crowd that had gathered in the lobby. "Let me tell you about the 2 soldiers Sergeant Thompson mentioned. Sergeant Mills and Private Chen died as heroes, saving the lives of their fellow soldiers. Their sacrifice and the courage of men like Sergeant Thompson is what allows all of us to work safely in buildings like this one." The general's words created a moment of profound silence as everyone present reflected on the cost of the freedom and security they often took for granted. The comfortable world of administrative duties and clean uniforms existed because soldiers like Marcus and his fallen comrades were willing to face danger and death in hostile places, far from home. "I want everyone here to remember this day," General Hayes continued, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Remember that courage doesn't come with a pressed uniform or polished boots. Remember that real military bearing is measured by actions under pressure, not appearance in peacetime. And remember that every soldier deserves your respect until they prove themselves unworthy of it." Captain Henderson stepped forward, his face flushed with shame and embarrassment. Sergeant Thompson, sir, I owe you a profound apology. My behavior today was inexcusable, and I deeply regret my words and actions. You have my utmost respect, and I will ensure that this kind of treatment never happens to any soldier under my influence again. Lieutenant Collins joined his superior in the apology. Sergeant Thompson, I was completely wrong about you. I let my inexperience and prejudice cloud my judgment. You've taught me more about true military values in the past hour than I learned in 4 years at the academy. Marcus looked at both officers with tired but understanding eyes. Gentlemen, I appreciate your apologies, but what matters now is that you learned something today. Use this experience to become better leaders. Judge your soldiers by their actions and character, not by their appearance or background. The corporal at the reception desk, who had been deliberately delaying Marcus's paperwork, suddenly appeared with a completed file folder. His face was red with embarrassment as he approached the group. Sergeant Thompson, sir, your paperwork is ready for processing. I apologize for the delay. There should have been no wait time for your priority documentation. General Hayes noticed the exchange and made a mental note about the administrative delays Marcus had experienced. Corporal, I trust that all personnel returning from combat operations will receive immediate and respectful service in the future. Their sacrifice has earned them better treatment than what I witnessed today. The corporal snapped to attention.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely, sir. It will never happen again, General Hayes. As word of the ceremony spread throughout the building, more personnel began arriving in the lobby. Senior officers who had heard about the medal presentation came to pay their respects to Marcus. Enlisted soldiers who had served under similar conditions nodded with understanding and solidarity when they saw his appearance and recognized the patches on his uniform. Major Williams approached Marcus with a warm smile. Sergeant Thompson, it was my honor to witness your recognition today. Your example reminds all of us why we serve and what real leadership looks like. Marcus stood and shook her hand firmly. Thank you, Major Williams. Your support today meant more than you know. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it's unpopular. General Hayes gathered the group of officers around him for a final address. Today's events will serve as a teaching moment for this entire installation. I want every officer and enlisted soldier to understand that appearance can be deceiving, and that true military values run much deeper than uniform standards. He looked directly at Captain Henderson and Lieutenant Collins. You two will prepare a presentation for all administrative personnel about the importance of treating every soldier with respect and dignity. Use today's experience as your foundation, and ensure that this kind of prejudice is eliminated from our ranks. The two officers nodded eagerly, grateful for the opportunity to make amends and contribute to positive change. They understood that their education had begun today, and that they had a responsibility to ensure other soldiers never experienced the unfair treatment they had witnessed. As the crowd began to disperse, General Hayes walked with Marcus toward the exit. Sergeant Thompson, you have a month of leave coming to you. I strongly suggest you use it to rest and recover. When you return, we'll discuss your next assignment. The military needs leaders like you in positions where you can train and mentor the next generation. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him all day. Thank you, sir. I'd like that very much. But first, I need to visit the families of Sergeant Mills and Private Chen. They deserve to hear about their son's heroism from someone who was there. The general's respect for Marcus grew even deeper with those words. Here was a soldier who, even after being publicly honored and vindicated, remained focused on his duty to his fallen comrades and their families. It was the final confirmation of everything General Hayes had already known about Marcus's character. As they reached the entrance, Captain Henderson called out from behind them. Sergeant Thompson, sir. Marcus turned as the captain approached at a quick pace. Sir, would you allow me to accompany you when you visit those families? I'd like to pay my respects and learn more about the men who served with you. Marcus studied Henderson's face carefully, seeing genuine remorse and a sincere desire to make amends. Captain, I think that would be appropriate. Those families should know that their son's sacrifice is respected and remembered by all ranks. The afternoon sun streamed through the lobby's large windows as the small group prepared to leave. The building that had seemed so hostile and judgmental just hours earlier now felt different. The lesson learned that day had changed not just individuals, but the entire culture of the place. Marcus Thompson walked out of the administrative building with his head held high, wearing his dirty uniform like a badge of honor. Behind him, he left a group of officers who had learned valuable lessons about judgment, respect, and the true meaning of military service. The mud on his boots and the stains on his uniform had told a story more powerful than any speech or presentation could have conveyed. The incident became legendary within the military community, retold as a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging soldiers by their appearance, rather than their actions. It served as a reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected packages, and that true military bearing is measured by courage, sacrifice, and dedication to duty, rather than the shine on one's boots or the crease in one's uniform.